But we start this week with the destruction of Remploy, one of the most horrendous acts of this government, which is to take away employment from literally hundreds of disabled people. And I'm joined on the line by Kevin Hepworth, who's the lead officer on Remploy at Unite the Union. Hi, Kevin, and welcome to Drive Time.
Hi, Tony.
First of all, would you like to just tell us about Remploy, what it was set up to do when it was set up originally, as I understand, by the Conservative government after World War II?
Yeah, Remploy was set up at the end of World War II in the first instance to find jobs and to help rehabilitate our, Army and Navy and Air Force personnel who were coming back from the war, having defended our country but suffered losses of limbs, etc., as a result of their wartime efforts. And it's been run since then, providing full-time employment for disabled workers and also providing training facilities to help disabled workers get back into employment and get back into what's loosely called mainstream. It's done wonderful work for, as I say, best part of 70 years nearly, and unfortunately just short of its 70th anniversary, this ConDem government has decided to pull the plug and close it down and throw literally 2,500 to 3,000 disabled workers on the scrap heap and pull away a lifeline for thousands more who've now not got that training capability.
But the fact of the matter is, what they're saying is that these businesses simply aren't viable, Kevin.
Well, we accept that. I mean, if you go right back to 2008, the then Labour government started to put in place a restructuring plan to help modernise Remploy. And they had to shut a number of factories reluctantly. But part of that plan was to then continue, because they left in place until things settled down, a very top-heavy bureaucracy. Unfortunately, once the last general election took place, this government then stopped all the movement of making, mainly able-bodied, very well-paid middle and senior management redundant. They put a halt on it. Now, the unions estimate that in salaries alone, never mind getting into the complications of pensions and cars and phones and everything else, they could have saved over £16 million a year by carrying on with the then Labour government's plan of streamlining the top. But they put a halt on it because this government wanted to shut Remploy. We had a meeting in the House of Commons in Portcullis House with the Minister for Disabled, and she made it very clear. It was not purely about the money. This was a Tory party decision because they just did not believe in the concept of Remploy. So they didn't want Remploy to reduce its cost. They didn't want us to get it down to a sensible level that justified its existence. And as I say, it was purely Tory doctrine that they decided to pull the plug. And unfortunately, Clegg and his clowns have supported them.
Well, one of the fascinating things is some of these Remploy plants, including, we're told, the one in here, well, there was one in Bristol, which was actually making money, actually able to pay the rent on its quite large warehouse and pay all the wages and still turn a profit. So how on earth does it make sense? I mean, one can possibly understand a non-profit making Remploy facility, Kevin, being closed down, but not surely if it is actually making money. I mean, how do they justify this?
Well, as I say, a lot of the sites hadn't got a catching else chance of making money because their overheads were so ridiculously high. They had, for instance, they had this ludicrous system where sites were charged over £1,000 a year cost for every computer terminal they had. And for every email address they had, they were charged £500. Just totally nonsense. It was just bureaucratic structures that just made it impossible for a site to make money. We put forward in 2007-8 a business plan which was partly accepted by the then Labour government, as I say, and part of that was to streamline the bureaucracy, to get rid of all the overheads that they were carrying that were unnecessary. And that, as I say, never ended up taking place. I mean, it is we actually met yesterday with the company, the final meeting of what we call the Remploy Consortium, with all the senior lay reps who've represented workers in Remploy, because we're almost at the end. We're down to the last handful of factories that are still to be closed. One or two are still hopeful there may be a buyer in the wing, but it's an absolute shambles. And when the government say they've not done it for monetary purposes or it's to the best value, they've never answered us why they have chosen to slash the redundancy package that the Labour government put in place, recognising the extra disadvantages disabled workers were going to have if they lost the job with Remploy closing. But they've reduced their redundancy pay by £5,000 per worker. I mean, that is just obscene. Some people volunteered to go in 2011 when there was a voluntary exercise, and the company refused to let them go, saying, no, they were vital for the future of the business. They needed them to help develop and take it forward. And then within 6 months, they're making them compulsory redundant, but they're making them compulsory redundant with over £15,000 reduction in redundancy pay in some cases. It's just an obscene way of treating people with disabilities.
It certainly is. I mean, it seems to me, Kevin, that you've got something like 2,500 of these disabled people basically being mugged by this government, because even if one of these Remploy plants wasn't making a lot of money, or maybe just a little bit, the idea that it's actually going to cost the public purse, a bit like we were talking about the bedroom tax, moving people into the private sector where more housing benefit has to be paid. If those people are having to claim disability benefits are out of work, this is actually going to cost the public purse more. So there seems to be some sort of really quite pernicious viciousness about the way that Remploy's being treated. I wonder if you've seen any evidence of that.
Well, we're getting worried phone calls from members already, exactly because of this, because they would live in and paying the full market rent because of the earnings from Remploy. So they haven't got a problem. Where because of the disability they've got to sleep with breathing apparatus, or because of their problems in sleeping, the partner sleeps in another bedroom because they get disturbed all night because they're very restless. Now suddenly, of course, they've lost their jobs, the redundancy pay was slashed, and suddenly they're looking at, they're told, go and sign on and you can get this and that and the other, and you can get housing benefit. Oh, by the way, you're not going to get a great deal because you've got 2 bedrooms and there's only a couple, so we think you only need 1 bedroom. So unless you can find a house and move out, we're going to slash your benefits because we're going to surcharge you for having the luxury of a second bedroom. A second bedroom that is vital to them in order to live. Otherwise, the partner's going to end up sleeping on a couch in the living room or something because they get disturbed all night long. Esther McVey, the new-ish, took over about 18 months ago, disabled minister, put out a statement either earlier today or yesterday saying how this government is seriously taking to task anybody who they suspect of hate crimes against disabled people. Well, this government's done the biggest hate crime on disabled workers with everything they've done. Closing Remploy, slashing benefits. Look at the mess that Ian Duncan Smith's got into over this new universal benefit, where they've trialled it on the 1,000 or so easiest targets, and they're now months behind, and he rants and blames civil servants for lying to him. It's time Mr. Duncan Smith accepted he's not fit for his job and moved out of the way. But the way this government have treated disabled people, it's just obscene. It's very much a case of, we'll attack the people who are most vulnerable, and they're also the ones who are least likely to come and make a fuss outside our offices because of the medical conditions. If this government had listened to our business plan, we could have been working to reduce the cost yes, it would have made redundancies. Probably between 400 and 500 senior staff would have had to go, and it could have been streamlined. Yet this government, at the time when they were saying to Remploy disabled workers, no pay rise, or at the most, if you earn less than £20,000 a year, got the 1% pay rise. At the same time, 500 or so workers in Remploy who earned over £40,000 a year got a £3,000 bonus average. Now, that is the sort of attitude this government have got to people. They look after their own. The wealthier you are, the more likely you are to get a benefit out of this government.
Well, it sounds to me like, sort of law of the jungle, basically, and obviously the disabled people aren't able to survive in that kind of world. But just give us an idea, Kevin, of the sort of activities that were taking place in these Remploy factories before they were closed. I mean, we've just heard this week the Port Talbot staff are heartbroken over the Remploy factory closure there in Port Talbot. Remploy confirmed that apparently no viable bids have been received for its furniture business. But this is a furniture business in this case, but give us an idea of the sort of spread of the different activities, the different work that was going on in Remploy across the country.
Remploy, as you just mentioned furniture, Remploy still is, till it shuts its doors, the single largest provider of furniture for schools. They make the best quality desks, they make the best quality library furniture of any company in this country. And as I say, they provide furniture for over half the schools in this country and colleges. They will not be there. The private companies are running their hands with glee because they're going to put up their prices and charge the taxpayer even more because there'll be less competition out there in the market. Remploy in Scotland have a textile business, and it is almost all in Scotland now. And they were the sole supplier and manufacturer for our precious armed forces of anti-nuclear and biological warfare suits. The suits they have to put on if there's a fear of a chemical attack or a nuclear attack. They will not be manufacturing them. There is nobody in this country who will manufacture them. So we'll probably end up buying protective clothing from our armed forces from a third world country rather than manufacturing here. Doesn't make sense. Remploy also had an e-cycle business. They're one of the biggest single recyclers of computers and electronics in the country. They can provide, and fortunately, in Wales, in Porth, it looks like that business will survive in a smaller form, where computers can be taken, they totally data cleanse them, so there's no worry of any information you've got on your computer getting out. Highly skilled, making sure there's not one jot of sensitive information left on your computer before you can then sell it on the second-hand market.
Well, I can just to come in there, Kevin. Sorry to interrupt you, but you'll probably find the National Security Agency and GCHQ have already got it.
Well,
you might find, but obviously there's a very, very, that sort of thing is extremely useful. Just going back to Port Talbot for a minute, a relative of one of the employees there said the employers, many of them disabled, were heartbroken at the news of the closure. He said they were handed letters giving them 1 month's notice. Apparently, a lot of them were crying. I feel really sorry for them. My son started after he left school. What else is he going to do now? And he echoes your comment that they're on the scrap heap now. Is that how Remploy workers feel, Kevin?
It's how most of them feel, yeah. And this is where this government are being very naughty with the figures. A lot of workers, because a lot of them are now into their early 50s, they recognise they're not going to get a job, so they're just saying forget it. So they're not signing on for employment and benefits. They're just taking their pension early and they're going to live on a reduced pension. So this government are hiding that fact and saying there are only 500 or so who are unemployed. That's because they've just give up. They feel that they've been kicked in the teeth. You say about the furniture, there was a bid in for furniture, and then it was withdrawn. And we suspect, having looked at what the bit behind them is, it's the halt hovering. Oh, well, we'll sit back, we'll let it shut down and then we'll come and asset strip. Well, we'll just come in and buy the assets and we'll not have to take on the people. But other people have put in bids for parts of Remploy and they've been turned down as not viable or not meeting the requirements. We cannot, as the trade unions or the workers themselves, get an explanation from this government, the DWP, or KPMG.
Kevin, we seem to have lost you there. As you mentioned, the interesting company KPMG. Are you still with us?
Yeah, I'm still sorry. Cut them from it.
Okay, yeah, just that's fascinating. I mean, we've had quite a lot of dealings with KPMG, Kevin, here, and I'd just be fascinated to know what KPMG's involvement has been, because they're under investigation, for example, by the Competition Commission for price fixing. They don't seem to be the most trustworthy organisation on the planet. One of their partners, for example, in the United States, was found to have been selling private, confidential client information in exchange for Rolex watches and bags of cash. So what's KPMG's involvement been in the closure of Remploy?
Well, they was the ones who put together the document saying that Remploy was financially not viable. They then, having done that, also have been paid huge commissions, nobody's quite sure what, so shrouded in commercial secrecy when you try and find out. They have been paid to try and find a buyer for the...
Again, a bit of a problem with the line, Kevin. Carry on.
And manage the process of anybody else who's showed an interest in any of the businesses. Now, we don't know what the remit from the government was. Nobody will tell you up front what you need to be able to do. All you get is it has to be believed to be a viable bid and value for the taxpayer. And that's all you get. So you don't know what it is. I've asked the question, and I know we've tried to get MPs to raise it. Some of the Labour MPs have done. Why is it shrouded in secrecy? They say it is commercial sensitive information. This is talking about bids for businesses that they're probably talking about a few £100,000, £1 million, relatively small beer. Yeah, you look at the West Coast Main Line tendering, with First Great Western and Virgin going head to head. The bid that they accepted as a government from First Great Western was totally in the public domain, and that was a multi-billion-pound contract. So much so Branson obviously could take it away, they could pour over it, compare it to theirs, and go back and say, well, you're wrong, you've made wrong assumptions when you've said their bid's better than ours, you've not looked at this, you've not... Now, companies who've been turned down in the bidding process have not been in that position because they're not told any information to judge it against. It's an absolute nonsense. You know, if somebody was prepared to take the risk and they're taking people's jobs and contracts on, and governments aren't having to pay out the redundancy pay and to then start paying people benefit, they should have given some of these businesses a far better chance and a crack at the whip. And they've just not done it because what they're doing is KPMG are looking at it and saying, well, take Norwich. Oh, well, if we shut the site down, knock it down, we'll sell it to one of the house building people and it's worth X million pounds just as a building site to us. Therefore, nobody could hope to compete on putting forward a business plan for a packaging business that would compete with a housing estate.
I'm very concerned about KPMG being involved in all this, and I don't think they're actually going to, we could really trust them. I mean, HBOS, for example, revealed that KPMG approved the bank's decision in May 2008 to put aside $370 million of provisions for the losses as its corporate lending division. In total, the actual losses reached 25 billion. KPMG got it wrong by a factor of 7,000%. Lloyds are likely to sue, and there may be possible fraud charges against KPMG for getting the figures so totally wrong.
I mean, they'll tell you as they do that, oh, well, there's different divisions of the business and different people are involved. But at the end of the day, our concern is this government wanted to close Remploy. KPMG obviously have a lot of government contracts. Therefore, were they really independent when they were looking at things, or did they, you know what they say, an accountant can make a set of figures read whichever way you like. If you want it to be positive, they can dress it up, and if you want it negative, they dress it up.
Well,
were KPMG under pressure to make sure they didn't put future government contracts at bid by coming down very heavily against Remploy having a future and not being optimistic.
I think you're absolutely right to point to the secrecy that's been involved in whether or not bids are being accepted, Kevin, as flagging up really that this is an ideological attack on Remploy rather than the excuses which are being used, which are supposedly financial. So, I mean, what do you think ultimately is the ideology, the thinking behind this? Is it simply that some companies lobbying the government feel that Remploy was unfair competition, or is there more a sort of political and ideological reason why the government doesn't like disabled people actually working and making a success of their lives?
Remploy disabled workers, almost from within a short period of time of the business starting, has always been a well-organised, well-structured trade union organisation. There have always been strong trade unions in Remploy because the trade unions from the very early days recognised the nature of the workers going into Remploy and how they needed that strong support. And therefore they've been well organised, they've been well supported, and Remploy workers have always been prepared to tell the government, whether it was this shower we've got now or the previous Labour government or the Thatcher government or the Wilson government or any other government, when they were not happy, they've been prepared to voice it. And the Conservatives especially in the 70s and 80s wanted to close Remploy then, and they didn't have a strong enough control in Parliament and a big enough will. This lot got control and they're just determined to finally achieve what they've always wanted. They just want us, just as Thatcher wanted to smash the miners and the print workers, more because she could see there were strong organised organisations. This government wanted to smash Remploy because they see it as a bastion of strong trade unions looking after disabled workers. And it's an absolute crying shame. I just wish some people could have come and seen Remploy workers at work, because they really are, it's hard to say, but they really are a credit to the working class. They do, with all the problems, they work as hard and as well as anybody else ever does. And it's a real crying shame that a lot of them are just never going to work again and some of them will be out to work for 20 years.
And also now, of course, they'll have quite a lot of work to do trying to make sure that they can claim right benefits and not get evicted from their homes, Kevin.
Well, this is the worry. I mean, we know from people who took the redundancy in 2008, thinking they were going to find jobs in 2008, having took redundancy and never found jobs when things were a lot better than they are now. And their health has seriously suffered. People have become housebound because they just end up so desperate and run down. And a few people have obviously died, and we just don't know how many of those have been hurried along because of the way they've ended up and the fact that they've become so stressed out as a result of what's been done to them. I just hope that, say, Esther McVey and before her, Maria Miller, factory killer, I just hope they can live with their consciences if they get told about former Remploy workers passing away and looking like they've gone away sooner than they should have done.
I mean, you mentioned Maria Miller there. I believe she was somebody who was supposed to be a disabled people's campaigner that actually came out with the original report which the government used to justify closing Remploy. Yeah.
Well, she stumbled from one disaster to another, hasn't she? Because she got promoted as a thank you for leading the start of the decimation of Remploy and moved to culture. And look at the mess she made of the BBC. She was in charge at the BBC when all the problems there erupted. So her track record's not brilliant. Esther McVey, who succeeded her, she actually was speaking against the government's closure programme for Remploy one week, gets made a minister for the disabled the next week, and immediately turns around and says, well, I was wrong, you should shut it. So
anyway, with the lessons that you've learnt, Kevin, from this, is there anything you can say to listeners who are angry about this, possibly disabled people listening, really to buoy them up? Because it's a bit depressing, isn't it, when you see a strong, rich, powerful City of London-led government just simply smashing them disabled people under the fist?
Yeah. I mean, all we can say to people is, when you finally get in 2015, which it looks like it's going to be, just remember what this government have done to workers such as Remploy and use your vote at the ballot box. Equally, we want to work with disabled workers and we want to talk to the Labour Party in the run-up to 2015 and beyond. It's not going to be a quick fix, but we've got to look at how we go back now to promoting better employment for disabled workers within the workplace. I'd love to think we could reinvent the wheel, but I'm a realist. I just think that once Remploy has finally shut the doors, it will be very, very difficult for any government to reinvent it all again. But we've got to do something different that actually finds a way of getting disabled workers into the workplace and in a comfortable environment for them.
Because, of course, one of the other things which we found out talking to the local Remploy workers here in Bristol was that actually the workplace was itself part of their support network, and that's now gone.
Yeah. Well, we know Remploy workers who, I mean, it sounds awful, but they have got no family life, they've got no family, no support, and we knew Remploy workers who went home on a Friday afternoon when they finished work, came back into work on Monday, and would probably never have spoken to anybody other than the odd shopkeeper over the weekend. With Remploy workers who, the fellow workers on Monday morning, would take them into a shower and let them have a shower because they've probably never washed since Friday. Because there is no care in this society anymore. And Remploy was a family to people. People supported each other. When they were depressed, there was people there who understood them, knew how they felt, and could help them. A lot of that has gone, and we're really worried about some people and what's going to happen to them. But all we can do is we will carry on fighting as ever. And I mean, the one thing I do know is, I've been a trade union officer for approaching 24 years, full-time officer, and I'm so proud of the Remploy workers and the way they were prepared to stand up and fight. And if there was any justice in the world, they would have won their argument and they would have won their battles. It's just a shame that with this government, it all fell on deaf ears.
Well, I suppose one thing we can take from all this, Kevin, is to just, if we've got disabled neighbours, friends, relatives, just to maybe spend an extra few minutes just making sure they're okay, because this I think is a hammer blow for many of them, and particularly those Remploy workers. But also there are all sorts of changes to the benefits system which are really hitting home. So I hope you agree that maybe a good thing to do is just to check on your neighbours, check on your friends, relatives.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, people know, I think, now to worry about perhaps a lonely elderly person who may live on their own, and think about your disabled neighbour as well who's in the same situation. If you know somebody's got a disability that gives them problems, just be a good neighbour, see if they're all right. If you've not seen them for a day or two, go and knock on the door. They'll not think you're being nosy. They'll just be so appreciative that people do care.
Well, Kevin Hepworth, Lead Officer for Remploy at Unite the Union, thanks very much for joining us on Drive Time this evening.
No, you're welcome, Toe. Thanks very much for all your support.
Drive Time on BCFM 93.2.